Hi everybody, today I'll be reviewing this Kershaw Knockout. This particular one has the Vortex Optics logo here and Vortex on the clip. The standard version does not have that engraving, however other than that, this is a standard Kershaw Knockout. This is an assisted opening knife. Unfortunately that means it will be illegal in the UK soon, which is the reason that I'm doing this review now. I haven't had this knife as long as I would like to before reviewing it, so please bear that in mind with the rest of this review. I've carried it for a while, I've experienced it a bit, but I haven't had as much experience with it as I like to before I do a review. I just want to get this review done so I can get them sold and be plenty ahead of the legal change. So we'll go into size comparisons like usual. It is a 3.25 inch blade. Here's a Spyderco UKPK and a Spyderco Paramilitary 2. You can see that the cutting edge is slightly longer than the Paramilitary 2. It has an overall length of 7.9 inches. Here's a Kershaw bare knuckle and a Kershaw Atmos. There we go. And one last comparison, we'll do the Ontario Rat Model 1 and the Hinderer XM18. There we go, you can see it's a little bit shorter than both of them. It's not quite in the full 3.5 inch size category, which is what you would expect because it's not quite 3.5 inches of blade. The thickness here though is absolutely worth noting. It's about as thick as the lock side and blade of an XM18 if you take off the liner and scale. It's very, very thin knife. It's 0.4 of an inch. Now 0.5 of an inch is not too far off a standard, but it feels very thin, especially for an assisted opening knife. Usually they've got a bit more bulk because the torsion bar has to be built in somewhere, but this one certainly doesn't feel thick in any way. It is 3.8 ounces, which is very light, not quite on the ounce an inch, but pretty close to it given it's a full metal construction and an assisted opening knife. Pretty good weight wise, very good in terms of thinness. Now this knife is made by Kershaw. I've only had to use their warranty once, but it did seem to be okay. The problems that I had were it being held up by a distributor for Kershaw in the UK. If I had been in the US and got in touch with Kershaw, they would have sent me a torsion bar straight to me instead of me having to go through a wholesaler. So I wouldn't have had a problem had I been in the US, but in the UK it took quite a while to get sorted out. That's my only experience with Kershaw's warranty. I think they will take care of you just fine. If you're not in the US, it might just take a bit longer. Now, I've mentioned before that this is an assisted opening knife. You can see Speed Safe written beneath the Kershaw name here. That's how Kershaw mark their assisted opening knives. And I've made a separate video on how Speed Safe works. So I won't be going into it in this video here. But what I will say is that the opening and closing action is what I would expect from a Speed Safe knife. It opens very hard, fast and easily, and the close is still perfectly doable with one hand. That's how I expect a Speed Safe knife to work, and this one is no different. It's slightly my favourite assisted opening knife action compared to the other Kershaw Speed Safes. It feels slightly better, but it is very, very slight. It feels like a Speed Safe knife. Now, the Knockout is a sub-frame lock. Sub-frame lock construction allows a manufacturer to use a lighter material for the majority of the lock side, which in this case is this green aluminium, and then a stronger material for the lock bar, which in this case is steel. I like sub-frame locks as an idea. I like this one as well. The lockup is about 20%. It's very, very solid, and there is loads of access to the lock bar to disengage. If we compare that quickly to something like the QSP Parrot, there's very little area here to get my thumb in to disengage the lock. It's doable, but the Knockout has a far, far bigger area, to disengage the blade with. Very, very nice, very easy. Couple that with the assist and the big flipper tab, and you've got a knife which is really pretty good for use with gloves, especially given how thin it is. Occasionally I found that my fingers would curl around and get in the way of the blade, but I find that with every knife I try and open with gloves. This one is really pretty good, especially again given how thin it is, Thin knives are usually not the easiest to manipulate with gloves. Now, like I said, the scales here are OD green aluminium with a steel subframe lock that is coated black, just like the screws and the clip. There's also a black plastic back spacer. This is my least favourite thing about this knife. The back spacer is below the scales here. You can see my nail will catch on this edge. And it is above the scales here, which means my nail will catch on the other side of it. Too high here, too low here, sticks out a little bit. Feel the edges as you do that. You can feel the edges up here, edges of the aluminium. That's not great. I'd rather they weren't using a plastic back spacer at all, but if they're going to do it, I think they need to be doing it slightly better than this. If we put that to one side though, this is very, very well made. It's made every bit as well, other than the plastic back spacer, as the Kershaw bare knuckle, which is the standard that I measure Kershaw's USA made knives by. And it's a high standard, it's a good knife. Not a fan of the plastic back spacer, but other than that, everything else is pretty well made. It's what you'd expect from a USA made Kershaw. Because it is an assisted opening knife and because it's running on washers, this knife should be really pretty resistant to dirt and dust. It shouldn't need to be cleaned internally, and that's excellent if that's something that you would prefer not to do. However, if you're someone who doesn't mind that, or it does get gritty over time, it's very easy to take apart. Far easier than you would expect from an assisted opening knife. You can see this reflective metal piece you can see through the lock bar. That's actually the cover that holds the torsion bar in place. It's all fine. It's remarkably easy to take apart and put back together. It really is. But again, you shouldn't need to. The blade here is great. It's made from 14C28N steel, which I think is a slightly better steel than it gets credit for. It doesn't have incredible edge retention. It's very stainless and easy to sharpen. At this price point, the blade steel itself is not incredible. Kershaw does make some knockouts though in M390, and they tend to be around $100, which is excellent value for a USA made knife with an M390 blade. So if you want a knockout, seriously consider the M390 ones. Huge functional improvement for not much more money. The blade shape is very functional, plenty of belly, makes it very good for chopping board work, very precise tip. The blade stock is not very thick here, as you would expect in a knife which is not very thick. But what really impressed me about this blade, and the reason that I like it so much, is it's very thin behind the edge. This is really thin behind the edge. In fact, it might be the thinnest behind the edge knife I own. It's considerably thinner behind the edge than even this Spyderco UK PK, which is a pretty thin knife. Very impressive. And as a result, this knife cuts beautifully. Very, very good slicing knife. Love how thin it is behind the edge. The pocket clip is not brilliant. You can see that there's screws sticking up into the pocket clip area. They're going to catch your pocket as you put it in. Neither the screws nor the base of the clip are recessed. If CRKT can do it on a 35 knife, Kershaw could be doing a bit better here. It's not really a big issue, but it's a pain. It catches in your pocket every time you put it in and take it out. I'm not a fan of that. I think they could do better. The clip is reversible though, and once it's in the pocket, it carries very nicely. It's so thin that instead of my hand sliding like down the back of it like it often does in a knife, my hand tends to slide down the front of it because it's so thin and held right against the edge of my pocket that my hand just slides down here. Makes this knife really pretty nice in the pocket. The bare knuckle clip is a bit better. You can see there's more room underneath here for your pocket to get through, and this knife hides really nicely tucked into the back of your pocket. This one still tucks into the back of the pocket and is very thin. It carries very well. The ergonomics here are really good. It's a very thin knife, as I've said 1,000 times already, thinner than, for example, this QSP Parrot, but the handle is taller in this dimension than the likes of the QSP Parrot. And that means that it still fills the hand relatively well, especially for how thin it is. It's really pretty good ergonomically. It could really do with some thumb jimping though. And if you've seen a few of my videos, I'm sure you will have heard me complain about that before. I use my knives in this grip most of the time, especially when I'm doing kind of hard cutting. And I really appreciate some jimping there, and it's a bit of a pain for me that there isn't any here. That would have really helped this knife out. Other than that, ergonomics are great. Should have jimped the spine, not really a big issue. In the US, these go for around $80. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But I also think that $30 more for M390 is worth paying if it's something you're going to carry and use a lot. If you're like me and you have quite a lot of knives now, and you're not going to spend too much time carrying this specific one, you might not want to do that. It'll be worth doing if you're going to carry and use it and get lots of use and wear out of that edge. If not, I would probably buy the standard one, and if I was in the US and I was buying a knockout, I would probably buy the standard one. If you're looking for a slim USA made knife and you're okay with the assist, this is a good choice. There are companies producing knives with better materials for less money, usually made in China. This knife is holding its own, I would say. Value wise, I don't think it's bad value whatsoever. The M390 one is doing really pretty well value wise. My biggest problem with this knife, biggest problem with recommending this knife, is that in terms of construction, materials, price, it's right in the same category as the bare knuckle. And I just like the bare knuckle a little bit more. I kind of prefer it visually. I think it's a bit more unusual. I really like the blade shape on the bare knuckle. I like having this kind of flat section out towards the tip. I really like the tip itself on the bare knuckle. I wish the bare knuckle was grammed as thin behind the edge as the knockout. If this knife cut as well as the knockout, it would be something really special. I do love the bare knuckle, but if it cut like the knockout, that would be really, really good. I would choose the bare knuckle over the knockout. Not that I have a choice anymore, because the bare knuckle is going to be legal here still. I really need to clean this knife. Bare knuckle is going to still be legal here, and the knockout is not, so I'm going to have to get rid of the knockout. However, despite taking the bare knuckle if I had to choose, I would have chosen both. I would have very much liked to have kept this knife. It is really, really nice. It's so thin overall and so thin behind the edge. It cuts beautifully. It's ergonomic. It's a really good knife. Unfortunately, I can't keep it because of changes to the law, which I'm sure you can guess my opinion on, so I won't get into that. But yeah, if you want a thin assisted opening USA made knife, this is a very, very good one. Very good choice. Thanks for watching. Bye.